Welcome to the Rural Recharge Podcast. I'm your host, Jeb Smith, president of the Florida Farm Bureau Federation. The Rural Recharge is a guided conversation that allows you to cut through the noise and multitude of information out there. You should be able to trust your sources, which is why we're a platform that comes straight from the source of farmers and ranchers that grow what we eat, wear, and use every day. Our guest joining us today is Adam Cook, owner-operator of Cook Farms with his wife, Ashley. Adam is a fifth-generation farmer in Gilchrist County, Florida, with a diverse operation. He serves on the Florida Farm Bureau Federation State Board of Directors and has an extensive history participating with the Young Farmers and Ranchers program. Adam and Ashley were the Florida Farm Bureau Federation Young Farmers and Ranchers Achievement in Agriculture winners in 2018. Their farm also received a CARES Award in 2014. Adam, thank you for joining us today.
It's good to be here, Jeb.
Adam, tell us a little bit about Gilchrist County, where it is, and just a little bit about how farming happens here in Gilchrist County.
So Gilchrist County, it was a little history. Gilchrist County was the last county formed in Florida. It broke off from Alachua County, and I'm not sure on the year, somewhere. I think somewhere after the turn of the century, but it actually was slated to be named Melon County.
No way.
Melon County. And the Gilchrist name come from, Gilchrist was a past governor that was on his deathbed at the time of when the county was, I guess, being actually, was being instated. And they, at the last hour, was named Gilchrist in his honor instead of Melon County. But that's how long Melons is in the history of Gilchrist County. They've been coming out of here since the 1800s.
That I did not know.
It was going to be Melon County.
No way.
So, but yes, so we're broke off of Alachua County. So we're 30 miles west of Gainesville, and it's primarily an agricultural county. From timber, the dairy industry is real prevalent here, and then row crops and vegetables.
Tell us a little bit about what it looks like. What's the topography and geography of Gilchrist County? I mean, we're sitting here at your place, and it looks like it can get a little wet.
Yeah, so we're actually sitting on what's called the Waukesasa Flats, and it actually starts in the north end of the county, just a few miles south of the Santa Fe River. It starts, and the swamp runs all the way down, basically through the center of the county. And I'm probably the only one of the few of what would be called a flatwoods farmer, black dirt type, and that's why I grow vegetables. My ancestors settled in the area, truck farming in the, from the 40s on. Prior to that, I mean, they've been here. Like this piece of land where the house and packing shed's on was my great grandfather's place, and I'm not exactly sure what all they farmed, but I know at some point they turned to vegetable crops, and that was real prevalent into my early childhood. But once when we were down at the pepper field earlier, just south of there it starts to be some lakes, and then about 5 miles south of where we were, it actually turns into the mouth or the beginning of the Waukesasa River. So that is what the Waukesasa Flats turns into, the Waukesasa River. Just so some of the wetlands and all the water here eventually turns into the Waukesasa River.
How about that? So, Adam, tell us a little bit about your operation. I mean, you mentioned your family's been growing some vegetables. We've actually looked at some of that today. Tell us a little bit about your operation, and I think folks would be impressed at how diverse it is.
Yeah, so we started out, my grandfather on my mother's side, the farm here where we're at, he was a vegetable farmer, cleared land, rodeo, did everything. And then my father was raised over where the watermelon field was at on some of the sand land, what we call sand land, over by Watermelon Pond. They grew up there. Actually, when him and my mother first married, they farmed over there. The late 70s, early 80s was not kind to farming.
That's right.
They wound up and got full-time jobs, but always, we grew up still farming. They had a patch of melons, usually always every year as a kids growing up, but shift work and farmed on the side. Somewhere about the early 2000s, when things really swapped to plastic and drip irrigation, they got out of it, mainly just run cows and did hay and grass seed. And then when I was 17, I was a junior in high school, I grew 5 acres of squash. Mm-hmm. like all vegetable farming, it was the best year to ever be doing anything, your first year. So we picked squash for, I had friends from high school and an older family friend that he brought help, and we picked them every day after school for 6-7 weeks, and they never brought less than $16 a box. This was in 2005. So I cleared enough money off of the 5 acres to buy a combine. And that really started, I grew, did a lot of custom harvesting from there. I mean, I went from 1 machine to 2 or 3. I mean, the most we were running 3 machines, and we run about 100 miles from here, from home, and across 4,000 acres at one time. And all while I was going to college. So my parents, they weren't going to help me get started farming if I didn't go to school. So that was the whole reason I went to school. And then the vegetables, I chased that for 2 or 3 years. And the next following years were not as kind as the first year. So then I was really interested in being at school before it was over with. So I never, at that point in time in my life, I never really think that I would be a full-time farmer. I got a master's degree in agronomy and thought I would be an extension agent or something close enough to the farm where I still felt like I was farming, but things really didn't work out. I was kind of waiting on some people to retire, and then I kind of gained some traction on my own. I still farmed all the way through college. I quit growing vegetables for a long time and just did grass seed and cattle and hay. I wound up working as a consultant with a large landholding company out of Georgia when I first got out of college, and then wound up with the Adena Springs down out of Williston. And one thing, I had a background in growing vegetables and all, and he was very interested in that. And that's how the last 2 years I was with them, I grew tomatoes and pepper. And I made some contacts with some, produce buyers at that time. They shifted gears, and I left there, and we made enough, kind of set ourselves up to where we farmed after that. That was my wife and I. Ashley, we got married in 2014, and I think from 2017 on, we've farmed full time. Had 2 kids along the way. Right. She worked up until then, and we had the kids, and then she just went to helping on the farm, and then ever since then, it's kind of been history. And then here recently, now she works with the FDACs and implementing BMP programs, so she really enjoys that. We started growing watermelons in 2018, and then COVID year, we had a garden. We did a garden, big, like 5-6 acre garden, had like 20 different varieties of stuff growing, and we kind of realized what worked on a local level here. And then after that, like I had maintained some contact with some of the produce contacts I made back when I worked as a consultant. And I was talking with him, and he always told me that one day he'd get with me, when he got an opportunity for me. And we got back into squash in 2021. It's really just our first year growing the squash was really train wreck. We didn't have good quality, and that's what I told you when we were in the field. We're not big, so we can't do it on volume. We have to make a name for ourselves on quality. Right. So we took what we learned from that season, and then the fall season that year, we went from having like 60%, 50% trouble notices to we packed the whole crop and didn't have an issue. So we kind of felt we figured out that crop. Then we swapped into we started expanding into pepper, and here recently in the last couple of years we've expanded into tomatoes as well. So we took that first 20 acre opportunity and have grown it into a 100 acre opportunity now, and it's basically because of our passion for quality is what's allowed us to these other avenues and to gain more business in the farm.
Well, Adam, you say pepper and you say tomatoes and you grow watermelons. But I mean, even then, how many varieties of pepper are you growing? It's not just pepper. It's right. A lot of stuff. And so, like, I guess if you want to get serious, we grow. We have to have a seeded watermelon to pollinate the seedless. So there's 2 varieties, and then we also have a yellow. We do a small yellow meated market, and then we have grown black skin watermelons as well. And then when we swap over in the tomatoes, we do primarily grape tomatoes. Now we grow 3 different varieties of grapes because some are determinate, some are indeterminate. It gives us some more yield up front and then carries through.
we grow eggplant, and then we grow yellow squash, acorn squash, and zucchini squash. And then when we get into the pepper, we grow Hungarian wax, Cubanelles, poblanos, serranos, jalapenos, and habanero peppers. So it's a lot. And then we still have never gotten completely away from our roots. And early on, when we first got married, one of the first things we did, and I guess I'll kind of back up a little bit. When I quit vegetable farming, when I got into college, when I started going to UF full time, I quit the vegetable farming, and corn was high at the time. So I started going grain corn, and I would haul it down here to Quincy. Right. Cattle would buy it from me. And then as I slowly, kept getting ahead, I started buying some heifers and all, and I started feeding out. I used that corn as the corn price went back down. I bought a feed mill, and we ground our own feed then fed out our heifers. Then Ashley's like, well, why don't we start bagging it? So a year or two after we were married, we started bagging corn, and we started out. I mean, she did a lot of it, but she dumped, like, we weighed out a 5-gallon bucket, and we had like a smaller bucket, and it made 50 pounds. And that's how we started bagging corn. The first year, we didn't do 200 or 300 bags. And then the next year we had found a cleaner, and we did maybe 1,000 or 1,500 bags the following year, but it was still a very crude system. And the way we bagged and weighed it, I mean, it was a hassle. And then I think we did that with that system 2 years, and then we found another system, kept expanding. I mean, when we first started, we didn't even have concrete. We used a loader tractor and put it in. We didn't have a barn. We put it in a semi-trailer. And, as we grown and was able to add to the farm, we got to the point here where we do like 25,000, 30,000 bags. I'm at the peak of it. I know, of course, and I'm not faulting, but people sees you doing, so they start doing too. So, and it doesn't, it's not like any of them take much from you, but when you're doing a local sales, if anybody, if they take 5 or 10%, it takes 3 or 4 of those, right. That takes half of it. So we kind of scaled back on the grain corn as we got heavier into the vegetables anyways. We don't have the time in the fall as we're growing a fall crop as well. So we grow, 100 acres of fall spring veg, and then 100 acres in the fall as well. So it kind of takes away from it anyway. So we kind of scaled back down on that. So this kind of one of them tangents I've talked about and that I get on, we had to back up. But we do so many things that I sometimes I forget what all we do. At the heart of it, the bagging corn and grass seed is what really got us started, right. And doing custom work or doing local sales early on. And that's something we've never cut out as we've grown. We always do sell to the locals. I mean, when we're running during the season, there's always somebody going to be at the barn there to just buy a box or two, right. And we service them same as we service the semi trucks. We're never too good to turn down a customer, big or small.
So, Adam, especially with the operation that's so diverse and so many things going on, you're farming year-round. You're growing a spring crop of vegetables, which starts in the fall. You're prepping ground. You end up into the fall, which you're already going to be preparing for here in the summertime, and then it'll go into the wintertime. You don't get much of a break.
No, we don't get much of a break, and as we've slowed down, and we've changed gears like all the custom harvesting we used to do, there was a big need for that at one time. Now, a lot of farms bought their own machines and all, and we've kind of scaled back. We didn't need to be doing that work anyways because it was taken away from our farming ventures. So now we're basically down to just custom harvesting our own, and we kind of replaced. We didn't really lose much because we replaced like all the acres we were doing. Then we went into doing more brown top millets and iron clay peas and such, and that supplemented. And then as we were gaining ground, we started doing more and more of our own Bahia grass seed. So it got to the point where we basically really didn't have time to be doing the custom. The transition happened at the right time for us on that. But honestly, now that our biggest break has come, as odd kind of as just July is our when with kids, it's great. That's our kind of our slowest month because we reuse half of our plastic, so we don't have to lay but 30, 40 acres in the fall. So, we can knock that out in 2 weeks and get planted in August and be able to enjoy the month off with the kids, and go and do a few things that we wouldn't have done, 10 years ago because July was our busiest month when we were custom harvesting.
That's right. What about crop rotations? You're involved in that. Vegetables can be sensitive to nematodes, diseases, in-soil diseases, soil-borne diseases. So you can do that. You can rotate and have a pretty intense rotation.
Yeah. So like on our watermelon ground, we rotate behind Bahia grass. So we run cows in Bahia grass for 5 years. Then before at least 5 years, sometimes if we gain another land or have other options, 5 to 7 year rotation on watermelons. And then on the vegetables where we're growing, that's really when we started growing the squash, and we expanded the squash first, and we got up to 40, 50 acres of squash. Well, then it's hard and when we only had a few acres of pepper in the beginning, and as we kept growing and expanding, that was my point, to get to where we could balance and have the same amount of acres for the solanum type crops as we did for the cucurbits, because then we could create a rotation within the vegetables themselves. So, we can, and the squash are, they're a lower value crop compared to pepper or tomatoes. So you can't really afford to fumigate squash alone. So what we try to do now, we get into the rotation where if we have a piece of raw ground that's been in grass a long time, we'll plant squash on it first. Then we'll follow up with tomatoes and pepper where we can fumigate it. Then we can follow back with the squash. We try to always follow the squash behind where the ground has been fumigated by the higher value crops, and it works out really well. So, but we still try to, if we do a year of tomato or a spring of tomato and then follow with squash, we still try to fallow the land afterwards, grow cover crops. Some of it we graze intensively, but I try to use sun hemp millet mixes in the summertime, and use a 3 or 4 way winter mix as well, with legumes in it as well as cereal grains, and that seems to work out really well for us.
So tell just a little bit on the sun hemp side, because folks may not know. You talked about a legume, and that is a legume. Mm-hmm. And what is it? What's the benefit from growing a legume mixed with some of your smaller grains?
So for us, I mean, we want to make biomass so we can plow it back down, and we're not going to increase organic matter, but at least it helps. It
helps hold it, because we're
helps hold it. Anything helps, right? So I like to make a really rank crop, so we have that much to plow into the ground.
But that's a green manure.
Green manure is what it would be considered. So we're capturing nutrients, any nutrients that were left behind. The sorghum mines it. The sun hemp also has some nematicide, so it does repel some nematodes and helps with that. And then the legume, it adds a little bit of nitrogen back to the soil. But everything we do, we're trying to, whatever we take from the soil, we try to give back and more. We're only worth as much as what we put into it, so I try to put more into it than what we get out of it, because I want it, we got to maintain this for years.
That's right.
Because as development encroaches on us, we have less land to deal with, so we got to take care of what we got.
And Adam, I think that's so important, is to taking care of what we got, and that's why I ask about it, because it's an intense managed crop. But you're utilizing the resources that you have, and they're finite. I mean, there aren't endless natural resources we have here, especially in regard to soil. And you live in a special place. You talked about the black dirt, but then you go to a ball-bearing sand on the top of the hill too. So it's definitely very, very diverse here. And I mean, where I'm sitting with you right now is just bottom land, flat land, and then we were on top of a hill where you could look over the top of everything.
And not 5 miles from here. It's crazy how quick the land changes, and to farm both types of land, it's a total different practice. I mean, it's of course we know when we go to South Florida, we go to your area in Hastings, it's different than here. Right. But I mean, I'm right here within 5 miles. I'm farming 2 totally different styles of farming has to be taking place here. So farming's a science, and anybody that doesn't understand farming, or that's the first thing I have to tell them. Farming is a science. You don't just go out there and plant seeds in the ground and reap the harvest. There's so much that goes into it.
It is a science, but it's also experiential. And I mean,
absolutely,
you can take somebody in similar soil types and similar, even weather, and it's not going to be the same if you move them across the state, or it's not the same.
No 2 years the same, even right on the same farm. You can't do what we did this year and had success with. We're going to have to adjust next year. So much of it has to be adjusted on the fly, and so, I know that's some question further in, but I'll go ahead and hit on it. But, that's where BMPs come into place, and there's so many. there's so many levels of BMPs. You can look at BMPs on the broad spectrum where we're talking about
Just stop there just for a second, because some people may not know what BMPs are. What is a BMP? What does it mean?
The BMPs are best management practices. And so there's so many different levels of it. On a broad spectrum, you're looking at crop rotations like we already hit on, or rotational grazing with cattle, where you don't just graze it to the ground. We keep a rotation on them every 10, 14 days. We push them to a new pasture and continue that. And so if you don't graze it all the way down, you get quicker regrowth, and there's so many things. But to the vegetable crops on the science, there's so many BMPs that take place on such a small level.
That's
tissue
right.
sampling, sap testing. It leads to spoon feeding fertilizers. We give a small amount of fertilizer through the irrigation, through the drip line every day. Every day on vegetable crops. There's no one big shot. You don't have to worry about leaching out, because we're only putting there every day what the crop's using every day. And we know that by the sap test and the tissue samples that we take every 5-6 days. Like I say, we can kind of have somewhat of a program drawn out ahead of time, but you can't adhere to it completely. Every crop grows different, even if it's the same crop. Sometimes crops just require more in certain years, and we've hit on that a little bit too. We've gotten some pretty hard restrictions tried to get put in place, and that holds that top down, and that is part of being a BMP. But also you have to make a crop too. When you have a lot of rainfall, or you have a lot of cloudy weather, there's so many other things that take in place. So, sometimes we can grow a crop with 70% of what they say that the crop requires. But then there's also times where we need 110%, because the crop requires we can't starve. You can't starve a profit, just like cattle crops the same way. You can't starve a profit into them.
That's right. So let's talk about that just for a minute, Adam, because you're a unique situation. You grow a diversity of crops and diverse operation. Let's talk about just how expensive the cost of what it is to grow some of the crops that you do. I don't think a lot of people understand. And so when it comes to managing that with best management practices, you don't want to be hemmed in so tight that you can't adapt to be able to make a profit. Tell us just a little bit about the cost of what it is to grow some of those crops.
And I think I would also like to hit on, because it kind of almost goes a little bit hand in hand of about how the public also thinks everything has to be organic or non-GMO, and I think the public misconception, whether we're talking about best management practices and over fertilization or to chemical use, they think we just go out there and just coat and just are dumping it and pouring it on the crop. We can't afford to do that. No. We don't want to use no more than we absolutely have to, but we also need to use it enough that we make the crop. Right. And this, there's a fine line there to where enough is enough and too much is too much, and we're not even, of course, we want to do it for the best management practices, but we also want to do it for our bottom line too.
Got to.
We can't go out there and carelessly misuse fertilize, chemicals, or anything, because at the end of the day, yes, it impacts our land, and we're the best stewards of the land as there possibly can be. But it also affects our pocketbook too.
That's right.
And that to me is the easiest way to explain that one. You're not going to go out there just like I guess the common person could say, oh, they're not going to pay somebody $200 to wash their car when it only costs them $20. We're the same way. We're not going to go out there and use $400 worth of fertilizer when $300 gets it more than done. And we're also going to split that application up. And we've learned through BMP programs over the last 20 years, the IFAS and the university has been so great in helping us implement BMPs, through the sap testing and tissue sampling and creating, doing all the studies on irrigation and all, and showing us that, after a certain time period, we're wasting water or we're wasting fertility if we're pushing it away. They've done so many things. We could talk all day and not ever touch all of the BMPs that are available to us and what we use every day. We do them so much we do so many of them that we even forget that it's actually considered a BMP. We just think it's a way of natural, a way of the life, the way it goes.
Adam, how much is it? I will go back to cost.
Back to the crops.
But even then, let's just be more specific. Even the crops. But talk about fertilizer. If you were to say 1 acre of land, on one of your crops, how much does it cost in fertilizer? Just to give somebody an idea.
I mean, depending on the crop, we're somewhere between $500 to $1,000 an acre.
$500 to $1,000
in fertilizer alone, and then we got plant costs, and plant costs is somewhere $500 to $1,500, depending on the crops, and then we have the chemical costs. We talked about earlier when we were in the field. South Florida has to deal with whiteflies spring and fall. We only have to really deal with them late spring and then all of fall. But, that one little insect can cost us an extra $1,000 an acre.
$1,000
Just the one little insect on top of the $500 to $1,000 chemical program we already have. That one little insect can cost us that. And so, when we talk about like a cucurbit crop, really watermelons or squash, you're looking at somewhere around $3,500 to $4,000 an acre in that. And where with your pepper and tomato crops, you're looking on at a bare minimum, $8,000 on up, more over $10,000 to $12,000. So there's a lot of money invested in a small amount of acres, there. And when the market is the way it is, it's fully across the board, it's all to scale, but even the row crop side too, there's a lot of money invested for the amount of return in it right now, which is in the negative to just maybe barely above it. And there's so many things going on right now that we can't really pinpoint what exactly where it's all coming from. Whether it's on the vegetable side of it, imported produce is a killer to us.
Yes,
we can't compete when we have to pay a man $22 an hour to harvest tomatoes here, where he's getting paid probably not even getting $22 a day in another country. And we don't know what, we know America, as Americans, they have the safest food production here to offer to them as anywhere. I mean, who's checking down there? Are we really requiring that they're held to the same standards that we are? They're not. And that's just the cold hard truth of it. But I'd like to think that everybody would want to pay a little extra to guarantee that what they're getting is safe. But when you walk in the store, when blueberries is in market or in season, or strawberries or squash or what, and you see that there's a product of Mexico or Ecuador or wherever it might be, and it's being produced right here within 100 miles of the store, but yet we got produce from thousands of miles away. Something's wrong with that picture. And I know we've tried to fix it multiple times, and we can't get it, and I've going to American Farm Bureau and it broadens. I know that's one of the questions later on too here. We'll go ahead and hit that, and what Farm Bureau has done for what you see it's done. But, it's put me into contact with people that I'd never else be in contact with, and I've sat in the lobby at American Farm Bureau and you get to tell somebody, you're from Florida and, what do you guys have against trade agreements, and NAFTA and all this, and they don't even realize they think it's the greatest thing ever for the grain producers. That grain trade's a drop in the bucket to what it does to us as a vegetable farmer.
Absolutely.
And they just don't even know. And then we're both farmers, but we're on total opposite ends of the spectrum, and they couldn't even understand, almost up in arms of why we were so against it, couldn't understand why we would be against it, and when you tell them, it's like, wow, I would be against it too if I were you.
Absolutely. So we've touched on a lot of different things. And there's some, but you're a young farmer. You started at 16 years of age and 16, 17, ended up growing 5 acres of squash, kind of got the bug because it was successful.
Sure. Absolutely. That was the worst thing that probably, whether you want to look at it, it was the best, worst thing that ever happened to me.
It's a good thing. It's a good thing. But even then, you had labor. You had high school friends that would actually go to work.
Yep. And now you don't. Now, 20 years later, we don't. I've been out of school 20 years. I've worked probably a half a dozen high school kids over the last 10 years, trying to get bagging corn after school or something like that. And I would have to say out of the dozen, I had 2 that I would recommend to go on further, and they have both left here. It's not a full-time job for them. They are moving on. The two that stood out to me, they're actually something in life now.
That's right.
And I like to think I had a little bit of part of that too. But
no doubt.
Labor's a big issue. And I'm gonna say it. Government's put us in this position over the last 40 or 50 years through social programs and then just the people with the complex of that they're too good to do a job. And I'll say probably in school, I would say it probably happened about my time. It was told to us, I really think in my generation or my period in school, if you didn't go to college, you weren't going to be anything. And that's the worst thing that was ever told to a kid, because college isn't for everybody. And a lot of people went to college and got degrees that have nothing to do with anything of actually getting a job, And I mean, you can get in, I'm not, can sometimes go down rabbit holes, but I had parents that supported me, but I also did it on my own. Through scholarship programs, I mean, I got scholarships and had at a community college level, had 100% scholarship. And then when I got to UF, it was more like 75%, but I worked during school too. I know the ones that, I know some, they didn't work. They went to school and they did nothing else but go to school, but I supported myself all the way through it, and so did my wife. We met kind of at the end of our college careers, and but she did the same way, she worked through it, but so many people just, there's no work ethic left anymore, and whether the school system took it away or where it all went, and I think there's so many other factors to it. And it leads us into what we are dealing with now, with the illegals and undocumented workers and this and that, and there's a reason they're here, Jeb. They wouldn't be here if there wasn't work for them. That's right. But they're doing everything that nobody's wanted to do for the last 20 years, and nobody wants to. That's the elephant in the room in Washington or in Tallahassee that nobody wants to admit. They wouldn't be here if there was not something for them to be doing. And it ain't just farming. I mean, honestly, I would venture to guess that really majority of farming is legal, because you can't find like my little farm. I mean, between my 140 acres of melons and 100 acres of vegetables this spring, we had 150 people at the peak of the season. You can't, and that's just one farm in the area. There's 10,000 acres right here in the Swanee Valley that's in vegetable production. And I mean, you do the math. I mean, that's thousands of workers. You can't find 100 domestics to put together one crew, much less thousands. So we're all on H-2A programs when it comes to harvesting the crops.
Well, we do have a system, and you utilize that system to provide for foreign labor that is legal in the United States. But even it's broken.
It's broken.
And it doesn't operate the way that it needs to provide for our producers, and I say producers, we're talking farmers and ranchers, but it goes well beyond that. I mean, that is a labor force that goes into hospitality, into landscaping, into construction. It's huge. And we're talking the better part of what Florida's economy is based on: tourism, agriculture, construction. And in that order, that is the larger part of that. The utilization of what we have in labor is not from onshore. It's not domesticated. It's offshore. Mm-hmm. And so it's an amazing thing. And you've already alluded to it. The expense of that within the government system, the H-2A system, is extremely pricey. And that's just an hourly wage that you speak of. But then you're also in charge of transportation and housing and other things that cost money.
I think I can simple it up to make people understand that aren't exposed to it. But let's take squash, for example. With everything on top of it, it basically costs $3 a box labor. $3 a box to pick and pack that squash.
And how many boxes to the acre will you?
We're going to look at somewhere between 1,300 to 1,700 boxes to the acre.
$3.
$3 to pick and pack. The box itself's $1.25, $1.30. It fluctuates with cardboard prices. So now we're at $4.30, $4.40. You go ahead and tack on. You got $5 a box, at least $5 a box, and by the time you cool it, ship it out, $5 a box. You know what the market's been on squash since last September? $4 to $6, right. $3 to $5 on zucchini.
That didn't include production.
Other than a small rally around the end of February, it got up above that, but it's been suppressed since September. Tell me how that works. I mean, and of course there is some deals in place. Like we were talking in the field. vegetables, they can get who you sell to. When you sell to a shipper packer, they repack a lot of it. They're getting year round deals, and so they can afford to pay you more, which is above the market. Which I mean, it makes it worthwhile to even grow the crop, But on the open market, and a lot of that's coming, that when you get imports in, when they're only paying $20 a day, when you're paying $200 a day for that labor, that goes a long ways in driving the market down.
But it also, in Adam too, and we just talked about that, and especially as a vegetable grower myself, I mean, used to be able to make some money on the open market. That used to be able to make good money on the open market. There's very little open market left now because of contracting. A lot of folks are contracting throughout the year.
Sure.
So there's a year-round supply, and it used to have highs and lows. Now it seems a lot of times the open market is going to be low, and it takes out both ends of it, which is good and bad. And it's just the way it is, especially as we see a consolidation of producers, a consolidation of buying points too. Used to be a lot more buyers out there. Used to be a lot more producers out there.
A lot more producers.
And it's not that way anymore.
Yeah, it's in fewer hands. I mean, it's in a fewer hands as it's ever been, And if things don't change, it's going to be even in fewer, because what the industry as a whole, whether you're a vegetable producer or a row crop farmer, it's all bad, right now. And I mean, I know we've been through bad patches before, but every time you go through a bad patch, you always lose some, and we can't afford to lose any more producers at this point. Cattle's really the only thing that's good, right? And it's hot, real good. But, it's also ain't been real great the last 3 or 4 years either,
Right.
So when you average it out, yeah, it ain't no different either, Yeah, it's great right now, but wasn't great, for the last 3 or 4 years. So I as a younger farmer, I try to look at things as averages, I mean, I still want to make it 20 more years, I'm looking at the long term. I'm not worried about tomorrow, I'm looking at the long term, So if I can, and I think that's the cost of the crops, the inputs and all have went up, especially with the vegetables and stuff, we've went to a lot more of that contractual produce, because I mean, they just can't afford not to.
So let's talk about this just for a minute, because you were the 2018 Florida Farm Bureau Achievement and Agriculture Award winner. That's a pretty impressive thing. And that means, you were the top young farmer and rancher in the state of Florida. What advice would you give to young people now getting into this business?
Whew. Well, I mean, to start off with, you need to be honest with yourself. Be honest with yourself, and then ask yourself if you're willing to make sacrifices. And when I say that, I mean it's going on vacation, or going and hanging out on the weekends instead of working, or putting in the hours. If you don't wake up in the morning and you look forward to what you're fixing to do that day on the farm, then it ain't for you. It ain't for you, and that's just the most honest thing,
Absolutely.
But, outside of that, you are what you make it. And that's how I've kind of,
Amen.
That's always been my outlook on life. You are what you make it. If you could think it, and you can see yourself through it, God's going to make it.
Amen. Most folks can't see your face, but I can. And Adam, it's something you're passionate about. You love it. And I think that's what you're saying. You got to love it.
You got to love it. You got to be committed.
And folks may not have seen too, earlier today we were riding, and your son Rye was in that truck. He's 5, and he's bit with the bug too. He loves it. And I don't know, there's something about these little farm kids that my daddy said it was a genetic deficiency reinforced by child abuse is what it is. And we love it. I mean, you're a 5th generation. I'm a 5th generation. You're living on the same ground that your great-great-granddaddy developed and farmed, and I'm living on the same ground that my great-great-granddaddy bought in 1922 and farmed, and I live in the same house he built in 1926.
Wow.
And it's a livelihood. It's my life.
It's
what
I do. It really is.
And you love it, and your wife loves it, and your parents are still in it and love it, and they do, because they're still supporting you.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that's probably the best piece of advice I've heard is, hey, you got to love it. You got to have a passion for it.
Yeah, you do. I a lot of challenges, through it, but at the end of the day, there's nothing else I'd rather do.
Amen.
Nothing else I'd rather do.
Adam, are there programs out there available that you could tell just some folks about that maybe federal or state that do have and encourage young people to farm?
I mean, when you're in it, there's FSA and USDA has a lot of young farmer loan programs, and I can't say that I ever actually used one. To be honest, when I was at that age, when I was right out of high school, that was when the recession hit.
Right.
I went from when I graduated high school, 6 months out of high school, I bought my first tractor. I didn't even have to have a cosigner in 2006, and fast forward, and I was really growing and expanding, by 2008 when it hit hard, they cut me off, a lot, I was too young and too
much of a risk.
I was too much of a risk. I was too much of a risk, so that really hurt me, and I mean, I was doing things and doing, making progress, but that was probably some of the worst advice, I would say. Not really advice, but, you always say, don't borrow money. But, early on you have to borrow money, but use it wisely.
That's right.
Use it wisely, and one of the best things about borrowing money is that's motivation. That's free motivation because you got to get out there and work because, you got bills to pay, I got to the point now where I'm back against, if I can't, but I mean, I've really got to the point where there's things I would love to have and want, but don't need it,
Right.
So I've kind of got to the point now where if I can't buy it outright, I'm not going to do it.
That's right.
But I'm at a different phase in my operation. Early on, I wish I would have borrowed more money. I'll be honest. I wish I would have borrowed more. I wish I would have bought some better equipment to start with because I wound up buying the better equipment later on. But I went through a lot of trials and tribulations with some wore out junk.
But you learned it.
It was a learning experience, and it probably helped build character. But
yeah.
if I'd had good machines to run with to start with, I feel like I could have had more, given me more opportunity.
I understand.
You can you pay for it two ways. As what I have learned. And there's certain things that you definitely ought to do. But there is a certain owing a certain amount of money. Not all debt's bad debt. As long as you're managing it correctly, debt is perfectly fine. Don't be overzealous with it either, and I know that's easy to say and not practice, but don't be afraid to borrow it, but make sure it makes good business sense, make sure it's if you got a good plan and you feel like you got it planned out to pay for itself, do it. Absolutely do it. Because I think that was one of the worst I was, kind of shaded on, be careful, don't do that, don't do that. But I think early on that kind of hurt me more than it helped me. I'll be honest, and I don't want nobody to go out there and take up, don't go out there and buy a $200,000 tractor when you're only working 100 acres. I'm not saying that, right. But buy what you need, not what you can afford. Because there is a difference there. Mm-hmm. What you can afford ain't gonna be much. You're gonna be working on it more than you're gonna be, and that's what we do is all got to be done in a timely manner. Right. And if you're dealing with constant breakdown after breakdown, you're not going to get it done.
That's right.
But I've had some good relationships, through my personal bank and then, through Farm Credit as well, and if I wouldn't be able to do it without them.
That's right.
You're never too big to borrow money, but use it wisely, But and back to it, and it's a motivator, when you owe it, it's a motivator. It's also a worry, but it's a motivator for sure.
So Adam, you were a member of the YF&R Young Farmer and Rancher group, and did the YF&R program, did it benefit you and Ashley? Was there some good things that came from it?
I wish I would have found YF&R as when we were younger, like when we were first married. We come into YF&R towards the end of to the top end of the age bracket, and so what we were looking for out of it at that point was different than what, we would have, I think it would have really helped us with business development and, getting some guidance from some of the older ones like me at that time, Right. I think it would have been a great benefit for us to have found, while we were in college, and first married and all, what it done for me, I just made a lot of contacts. I had been out of school for 10 years and pushing 10 years at that time, out of college. They would reinvigorate some of my enthusiasm for
sure.
other people, and what, meet other people and see what they were doing and learn from them. I mean, you always take something away from everybody. Somebody's always got something to
Absolutely.
offer, and that's what I just love the camaraderie of it all, if nothing else, But there's so much to offer, I mean, it is as big as you make it, it really is.
One of the things when we were going through this, James sent me these notes for this podcast that I thought was really neat. And that just talking about diversity of operation, you do some hunting on your place too?
Yeah. So early on, we did turkey hunts. My wife and I, with my dad and brother-in-law, we kind of took that on. And then as we've gotten farming more and all, we don't really manage with that anymore. That's more my dad and my brother-in-law,
But they still do it.
They still do it, absolutely. And we help some. We always help with one or two a year, try to. But, that's kind of one of our big, turkey season is one of our biggest seasons. Our biggest planting season as well, so it don't work too well for us anymore. But, that's been a great asset to the farm early on for us, There's so many ways to generate revenue, and I mean, when we first did the COVID garden, she was really into wanting to do a farm stand and maybe some agritourism and such, and I think, as we expanded with the commercial farm, she kind of fell away from that. But there's so many ways to make, and what better way to educate? I mean, that's some of the only time, regular people get that close to their food production is through agritourism, so I think it's a great avenue. I commend the people that do agritourism, because that is you think growing a crop is a big feat, and somebody thinks, oh, we're just letting people on farm, but that to me, I mean, there's just so much goes on to that. I commend those people that are doing that service, because it is a great service to everyone that farms. For those people to come to those operating farms and see, even if it is, not exactly how we operate in the commercial world, just to get the general public out onto a farm and seeing, crops being produced, is big. But I don't think I want that headache.
Well, I tell you, it does. It takes different personalities to make things work. And, there's I'm a producer. I'm not necessarily wanting to deal with the public. And there's a lot of risk and a lot of exposure, the
liability of it. I mean, it's just wild, but it's a great service to all farms.
Absolutely,
all farms. It's not just to them what they're doing. I mean, it is a great service to all farms.
Great opportunities, and especially too a lot of beginners and young farmers that are starting out can have opportunity to make an income.
I mean, and that's one of the best ways for a young beginning farmer to get started out is some type of U-pick, something that is, a full circle programs, for a farmer starting, for a small person starting out is the best way to do it, whether it's U-picks, agritourism. I mean, they do photo opportunities in flower. There's so many different things, and that's small. It's a small scale, but some of that has huge margins.
Absolutely.
Can't have it if it's in the location is definitely key for that. But that's something somebody can start on a small amount. And offering services. One time, the farmer once told me, he said, that smile, if you can figure out a way to couple your farm with a smile, you'll make more money than any other commodity.
That's right. Adam, is there anything you'd like to just the last minute that you'd like to leave with the listening audience?
I'm not too good at those one-liners or what. I will say, I guess, so. What is it? You always hear people say, "Oh yeah, fake it till you make it," or whatever. I cringe when I hear that. I cringe when I hear that. I would like to say that you grind until you shine. You grind until you shine.
I'm gonna tell you what, Adam. I love you, and I love your passion. I love being around folks that just love this industry, and you do. You love your family. You love this land. You love the Lord, and it's just a blessing to be around you. And I will hope that folks can sense that passion through this broadcast.
Yeah, I hope they can feel it because I can feel it. I know you felt it. And I would also tell the young person that's getting started too, pick a good partner in life.
Amen. Well, there you have it. Adam Cook, passionate farmer, lover of his family, and a blessing to all. Thank you, Adam. Thank you so much for supporting the Rural Recharge podcast. We hope that you are enjoying these conversations brought to you by farmers for your benefit. While you're here, please consider giving us a rating or a review. It really does help us to continue to share the stories of our Florida farm families and the important impact they have on your community. Thank you, and have a great day.